Hello, anybody there?
Yes, hello. How are you?
Oh, I'm well, Donna. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
No, I'm excited.
Wonderful. So, if you don't mind, how about we kick this thing off?
That'd be great.
May I ask, where are you from, or where are you these days?
hmm I was born in Los Angeles. I grew up in Orange County. When I was growing up there, it was really awful. I mean, it's awful now in a different way, but it was very awful. And we were the only Jewish family on the peninsula where I grew up.
Mm.
And then I fled as soon as I can when I was 18. Wandered around different colleges and conservatories and ended out in the Netherlands. And I lived there for 22 years.
Oh, wow. So that is a completely new life, different experience. I imagine that taught you a lot about our culture. Were there some things that you were at odds with that culture as you went in?
No,
You felt right at home.
not that either. I so my uncle was Dutch,
Oh, okay.
but nobody believed him. Everybody thought he was German and trying to pass.
Mm.
And my aunt and uncle lived in England and in France and in New York. They lived all over the place. And I'd been with them a lot because my aunt was my favorite person. So I'd been to England many times. I'd been to France many times. I thought, oh, I'll be fine. It's Europe. But Europe doesn't really exist. It's just there's a lot, all those countries are so different. You know, it's not one place. So I wasn't expecting the culture shock that came at me full force. I was in such culture shock.
I see. Having gone through that experience, when did you find writing? Was it along your travels or was it when you were younger?
I'm just writing an essay about this because somebody else asked the same question. I started writing when I was a kid. I mean, I remember when I was 6 years old in the first grade, and Mrs. Bowles, you've got those wonderful sheets of lined writing paper. The H has to be this high, and do you remember those? Did you get those?
Yeah.
And I loved those. And I wrote a story, and she put it up on the board and said, "This is great, and you should write more."
Bless those teachers.
But really, so bless those teachers. And my childhood was turbulent. And there were some bad things, and it was good to have that. So I wrote on and off all my life. I wrote a lot in high school. I wrote, poetry and essays for my friends who couldn't write. I got stuck cheating sometimes, but it was always, I never thought I'm going to be a writer. I wrote. That was who I was. And then I went to San Francisco State during when Hayakawa was there during the riots. That was I fled Orange County, where I was incredibly sheltered, and got to San Francisco State, and people were killing one another on campus.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and my parents had both been in the Communist Party. And so I had a file.
Oh, wow.
It was just surreal. It was surreal. And so here I am living in the dorms right above the cafeteria, where if you look back at the news and all this, that's the cafeterias where a lot of the SDS meetings were and where people did get shot. So it was interesting.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
That was something of an awakening then for you to be coming from a sheltered, perhaps troubled place to something of a wider scope, something that was definitely more imposing than anything that you had come up against.
It was really an awakening. I mean, I grew up around purely white people, and they were mean as shit to me because I was not considered white. I was Jewish.
Yeah.
And so here finally were all of these other people that also weren't being treated well. I don't know. It was incredibly eye-opening, but it was a long distance for me to have to travel, as spiritually and mentally. You know what I'm saying? So I didn't travel it right away. I didn't go back to San Francisco State. I left.
Mm.
after that first year and was just lost and went to Cal State Dominguez Hills
Mm.
and studied psychology. And it was at the time there were no grades and basically no classes. I wrote poetry to pass my physics class.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I was living in a commune, Yeah. And I picked up the flute and I thought, this is what I need to do. My mom was a musician.
Mm.
I said, this is it. This is what I want. I have to do this. And I was, 18. It's a little bit late to start music if you want to be a professional musician. So, but Cal Arts at the time had this policy that if you were accepted into the school, have you ever been up to Cal Arts?
I have not. No.
Okay, it's probably different now, but there's a quad, and the quad is like located in the middle of the school, and all the different corners are the different schools, film, dance,
Mm.
creative writing, and you could cross the quad and change majors. So I thought I'm never going to get into music because I haven't been playing. I've been playing for 8 months.
Mm.
Nobody's going to take me. Maybe I can get in as a writer. So I pulled together all my writing and applied as a poet and got in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Clayton Eshelman was running the program at the time. And he just wasn't my cup of tea. But I wanted to play flute. So I got in and I crossed the quad and changed majors. Yeah. I'm not making any of this up, but it's a great story. So I changed majors. And the thing was that the rule was you could do that. But the woman the flute teacher was like, what now? I have to hear you play. So I was assigned to her assistant. Her assistant was my teacher, this Georgia Mohammer, a Swedish girl, lovely girl, who was like younger than me and astounded at, how amateurish my playing was, I'm sure. Like, how did you get in here? and they was like, Jill Shires was the main flute player. And she, every time they said, Jill's got to hear you play, she's coming to your lesson today, I'd call in sick.
You just couldn't face it at the time.
No, I knew I would never get in.
Mm.
And I practiced so hard. I just lived in the practice rooms. I just practiced 12 hours a day. Wow. And finally, Jill figured it out that if she announced herself, I wasn't going to come. So she showed up. But by that time, I'd been there for about 8 months. Mm. And she took me.
Wow, she did.
Yep. And thus began. And so that's how I began to seriously study flute.
Mm. And so from your bio, you mentioned that you follow your flute teacher to the Netherlands. But one curious thing sticks out for me, which is that the only way for you to access Dutch culture was through their poets.
That's right.
And I'm curious what you mean by that, or what that connection was.
So I hated the flute style in America. And then Franz Vester came and did a masterclass at Cal Arts. And I really had an affinity for that playing, and he liked me. So he said, I dare you to come to. Because, who's going to pick up and just go to this tiny country? So don't dare me. I went. And I showed up. And once again, and that's when I thought I'd be fine, because I'd spent so many years of my life in Europe. But I was unfine. Mm. And I didn't speak the language. And he wouldn't speak English to me, basically. It was like, you're going to learn. And I ran into this book. I'm in the bookstore, just lost. But I loved the bookstore. And there was this book of 1,000 of the most important Dutch poems by Gerrit Komrij, this collection. Mm. And I picked up that book, and it was thick, and I took it with me everywhere. And I just worked out these poems word by word. And that's where I felt home-ish. Because isn't the poetry the soul of the nation in so many ways? So I blundered my way with my bad Dutch. And, I would translate it. And by that time, I'd made a couple of wonderful friends. One who ended up being a translator, and she would sit with me in the park in the Fumble Park and help me work out these poems so that I could send them to my mom. And here's what I'm reading, Mom. They're so great, because a lot of them aren't translated. So
Well, that's a beautiful connection to your new world and then the old world. It seemed like it became a thread for you that kind of tied everything together at the moment when it seemed fairly chaotic from the sound of it.
yep, yes, chaos. I would say my life has that. And and so poetry just became really important to me. And of course, I started writing again, but I did not take it seriously. I mean, it was just a lifeline. It's always been a companion, but I never thought, oh, somebody else should read this. And then all sorts of stuff happened, and I got married, and I had a child, and still really involved in reading poetry in Holland, and writing, but and then we moved back to the States. And I thought, easy peasy, I've lived here before. But no, because I'd lived here as a hippie, as a child, as somebody who could barely pay the bills. And now I came home with a daughter and a husband and had to find a job. And I was, by that time, a responsible scientist. And I had no fucking idea, pardon the language.
Yeah.
How do you navigate this society? So culture shock again in my own country.
Yeah.
And back to reading a lot of poetry. And my husband, who was a scientist, I skipped the whole science part of my life, but so in Holland, I studied flute. I was going to be there for a year. It wasn't long enough. I ended up doing my entire degree over. So I did a new master's degree with France.
I see. Okay.
And then playing professionally, and married, divorced, playing professionally. But I had an itch. So playing professionally, reading a lot of poetry, and practicing an instrument day in, day out, it's not intellectually stimulating. You're not thinking big ideas here. And so my car broke down, and I was doing an opera gig in Rotterdam, and they paid for a taxi to drive me back to Amsterdam, where I was living. And so, we're going back to Amsterdam. We drive past this building that they used to call the Coffin. And I said to the taxi driver, "What's that building, actually?" And he said, "Oh, that's the psychology department from the University of Amsterdam." I said, "Oh." And he said, "Yeah, they just started this new part-time evening program. That's why the lights are on." I said, "Oh, let me out." It's I can walk home. It was pretty close. So up, in my long black gown with my flute touched to my breast, up I went, and I met this funny little man, and I said, "Gee, I hear you have a part-time program. I don't know if you know anything about academia, but if people start part-time evening programs, that means they need money. They need bodies. They'll take anything." So I said, "Gee, I would love to do it." And he said, "Oh, okay, great. So you've got high school." "Yes, in the United States." "Oh, that doesn't really count, because you don't get the same education. But you have other degrees." I said, "Well, I've actually got 2 master's degrees and conservatory." And he said, "But that's a trade school. That doesn't, you need some remediation." So, and you need special dispensation to join this program because you don't have the credentials. He said, "I'll write a letter for you, but I can't really do anything until we get the Ministry of Education, like Hogwarts, to agree to this." So I went home, sort of forgot about it. A few weeks later, I got this letter. By then, my Dutch was excellent. I got this letter, and I couldn't read a word of it. Gee, this is civil servant language. I have no idea what these words mean. And I didn't know. I sat on my table for a few days, and finally I thought, maybe that funny little man at psychology. So I grabbed the letter, and I went up over to the psych building, and I went upstairs to Hank, the funny little man. And I said, "Do you know what this is? Can you translate it for me?" He said, "Oh, you don't really need to know what it says. What it means is you've got class tonight at 8.
Oh, that's so wild. It is.
Yeah.
It feels like you were receptive every step of the way for something that would make sense to you. maybe not rationally, but just intuitively, right? Something kind of
Yeah,
felt right and you had to go follow it.
right. And so psychology, it was a part-time program, which means to get your bachelor's degree was 4 years and to get your master's was 8.
Oh, wow.
But I was playing flute, I was teaching, I was fine. This gave me what I wanted, something else to think about.
Mm.
So I sort of blindly followed the program, but it was a part-time program in the evening. And there was great dissent among the teachers, the university people. They didn't want to teach this program. You know,
Oh,
it
I
was
see.
like, I don't want to teach from 8 to 10 on Tuesday night. I want to go
Yeah.
home.
Yeah.
Not what I signed up for. And so things were not run very smoothly.
Mm.
And I said, I have concerts. So if you move my exams at the last minute to a night that I play, I can't. It's got to be a little bit better organized.
Mm-hmm.
What you guys need is an evening study dean, somebody specifically for the evening study. Long story short, they said, okay, fine, you do it. So, and by that time I was really tired of teaching. I still played, but I didn't want to teach anymore.
Mm.
So I quit my teaching gig and I did that. And then, people sort of got to know me. And long story short, I ended up doing my PhD and just leaving professional music.
Oh, wow. So that at that
Which
point,
really
oh,
was
go
awful.
ahead.
It was like ripping out a rib, but
Mm.
yeah.
Did you ever get back to it? Did you ever do
I
performance
tried.
again?
Yes, I tried, but it was, it's all or nothing music.
Yeah.
Classical music, all or nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wasn't good enough then for myself,
Mm-hmm. It seems like it became diminishing returns, and at that point, it seemed like this was the better path to go. So now that we've set the stage, it does seem like you come back to the U.S. with pretty much you know, a series of journeys already lived, and
Right.
you're having to contend with the assimilation process of your own country. How long does that take, or does that ever go away now that you're back in the US?
It never goes away, but I would say every serious assimilation process takes about 5 to 7 years.
5 to 7 years.
Yeah. When we came back, my husband had been a TA in one of my classes and had a really good job in Holland. And I had just gotten a good job. So we were both in good university jobs. But he really wanted to be warm,
Mm,
And
yeah,
he also was really miserable in academia and wanted to change careers and go into art.
I see.
And he's a wonderful artist. And I thought, I changed careers. Life's too short. So
Mm,
let's do it. So when we came back here, I was going to be the breadwinner for a while, and he was going to go to art school. So he went to Otis, College of Art and Design, and I ended up teaching at USC.
mm,
And he became friends with this group of crazy people, wonderful people, who ran the creative writing department at Otis.
mm.
And they would come over for dinner, and we would drink way too much wine. And somehow it came out that I wrote. And Paul got me to show him something. He ran the program.
Mm.
And he said, okay, you got to just come to the program. And, it's part-time.
It's a recurring theme.
I feel like my life keeps rolling over. And it was a part-time program, and they needed bodies, and I was a body, and wrote, so he said, no, you can come, it'll be great. So I have a really good friend who's a novelist,
Mm.
and I talked her into it, and we went together.
Oh, so that's nice. You got to have a companion there as you embarked on once again another journey there.
5 year master's degree.
Oh, it was a 5 year. Oh, wow.
It's a 2-year master's degree, but I was part-time because I
Yeah.
was working full-time.
Yeah. So at this point, you're up to how many master's degrees? Because this is
I have 4. Yeah, I have 4.
yeah. Is this something that because it doesn't seem like you were consciously thinking of, I'm bettering myself, I'm doing this, and I'm going to have these accolades or these degrees. You were just, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, is it like you were just going along for this journey, for this adventure to see.
It's kind of embarrassing, but there was no plan
Mhm.
involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's an admirable trait. I mean, I think a lot of us deny certain impulses to pursue avenues and opportunities. And I think this is really a great example of the good that comes from that. And you'll have to tell me if at the time you felt like it was a good decision or if any of these felt like they were the right decision.
They all did.
Yeah.
It was all, and it wasn't right or wrong. I never thought of it that way. And, now I've spent so many years in academia counseling kids, and I
Mm.
watch them take these really measured decisions. And I think, man, that's not how I work.
Yeah.
But I had when my dad died, he left us enough money for me to be an idiot. So some of these kids, they have to take other things into account.
Mm.
I don't know that it
Right.
helped them though, because it's still the same decision.
Right. They're creating certain barriers for themselves without needing to, if that's.
I can't say that for sure because I'm not them.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, this is the age of careful decision making, and I don't see these decisions as being any better.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And they're so painful.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there is sort of like this added stress to our newer generations who feel like they have to be perfect. Or maybe that's always been the case. I mean, I'm speaking in generalities, but it does seem like this generation is more measured, for sure.
It does to me.
So coming back to the poetry journey, which is now starting in the timeline, what were some takeaways from that program? Did you feel like you made leaps and bounds as a poet, or did it just reaffirm some intuitions that you had already had?
None of that. I ended out not doing poetry, but creative writing, because I'm a woman who has avoided poetry all my life because it's so hard for me.
Yeah.
And because it makes me cry.
Mm.
When I hit something true.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's always scared me, and I've always thought I'm not good enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I ended out doing creative writing instead of poetry. I'm such a jerk. But also that meant that my friend did creative writing, so we could be in all the same classes. But I did a lot of poetry on the side, and that program was chaos. So you just did whatever the heck you wanted. And it's not like I learned so much about poetry. No offense, Otis, but it was not that great of a program. But I learned to incorporate writing back into my everyday life.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, that's the biggest gift.
Yeah. So what was I know it's difficult to articulate because I completely empathize with you in this idea that there are certain forms that are overpowering, overwhelming when we experience them. And I feel kind of that same way with poetry. It is an intimidating form for me because English is my second language. And ever since I was 10 years old, there was a certain kind of barrier that I myself added to it. But I'm curious if you could identify what were the things that kept you at arm's length of the thing that you wanted to do for so long.
The image I have is of poetry standing behind me, and I've got my back to her, and I'm terrified that I won't be any good. And I'm also terrified that once I turn around, that's it. Then I've committed. And I turned around in 2013. I finally turned around. Then I know exactly when I turned around.
Yeah. Could you describe that moment, that release when you made that decision, and how did that look like in terms of taking action towards that poetry life, if we can call it that?
So back to my friend Darcy, who went with me to the program. She went to Breadloaf in 2012. And she said, "You'd love this. You should come." And, I was still going along writing these stupid short stories and being a professor in psychology and making my career and being important, being Dr. Metz. And for a female who grew up in an area that I was not only, that I was just really second-class citizen, being Dr. Metz is super important. So Anyway, she said you should come. And I didn't know anything about Breadloaf. I didn't know anything about the writing world.
Mm.
I said, oh, well, sure, Darcy can go. I can go. Why not? And so I applied as a poet and I got in.
Mm.
And only when I got there did I realize that, Jesus, this is the real deal. I mean, Carl Phillips is here. I mean, if these people take me seriously, and it was just like I turned around and poetry, the vice of her grip.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. That was it. Yeah.
So from that point, you felt completely liberated to engage in a positive way or in a healthier way with this form that had sort of evaded you, or that you had been avoiding for a lot of your life. It seems like there was a completeness now that allowed you to move forward.
Yeah.
Did you develop a procedure for writing, or what did you feel like you needed to write about to continue that progression?
Oh. So before I went to Breadloaf, I'd been working with Sarah Manguso, who's just amazing. Pretty much my childhood and all the weird shit that went down in my childhood.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty autobiographical, and I didn't like that. I wanted to observe the world, not just my inner bullshit.
Mm.
But you don't get to choose, which is one of the things that terrified me about poetry. You don't really get to choose, or at least I don't.
Yeah. Do you feel like after a certain point in time, you're able to broaden the scope a little bit? Or is that still the thing that you gravitate to at this time?
So that's a really good question. Next to my childhood and all that stuff that everybody writes about, let's be honest. I'm a very religious Jew, in a Reform sort of way. Like I have my own relationship with that, and and friends that I study Torah with, and that has become a really important part of my writing, and also a really important way of experiencing the world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yeah.
It kind of ties into another thing that I noticed, that one of your bios mentioned that you did attend rabbinical school for a year. Is that something that you want to get into?
Sure.
Or if it had an impact, I guess maybe that's where I should go with it.
Yeah, actually. So being the restless soul that I apparently am, I don't know how it happened, but at our Temple Israel of Hollywood, which is a big temple, they didn't have simple Saturday morning services. They had, the Saturday morning was always a bar bat mitzvah. I don't know if this means anything to you, but it's
a little bit.
But there was not just come in, worship for an hour and go home. And people really wanted that. And we had a lay-led service that we ran. That was that the temple supported. So I ended up being, the rabbi, and my husband was the cantor. And we would run these services every Saturday. And then once during the high holidays, there's always one Shabbat between all of the other things, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And the rabbis let us run that one because it's a lot for them. So we ran that Friday night. It was all very cool. And at some point, it's like, I have hit a wall here. I am saying the same words. If I'm going to be serious about this, I should go to rabbinical school. Oh, that'll be fun. There's a part-time study. So I went and I applied and I got in. And then a couple of things happened. So they were at this temple in Venice, and it was really easy to get to. Meanwhile, I was still writing, but between my work, which is a full-time professor at a university situation, with research and a lab. At the time, I think I had 22 people in my lab.
Wow.
And So it was like, do I want to be a rabbi or do I want to write to God? I mean, there's got to be the 24-hour day is just a clusterfuck.
Indeed.
I need to make some decisions here.
Mm-hmm.
And there were things about the rabbinical training that I didn't like that were kind of disillusioning, actually. And I also have a really good friend who's a rabbi, and you are a rabbi. Once you're a rabbi, 24/7. That do what, you know. And then they moved to Hillel, which is at UCLA, where it's really hard to park and get around. And I broke my hip. These two things.
No.
Yeah.
Oh.
I think not rabbinical school. And so I think, but writing. And then I have to be serious about writing.
Yeah. So it seems like there came a time to prioritize and things were converging at, you said around the early 2010s, like 2013, that this was kind of happening?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So we're looking at almost a decade of commitment to the writing. And so I wanted to talk a bit about your full length, which is your full length manuscript, General Release from the Beginning of the World, which is a beautiful, lush title that I really enjoy. Can you tell me a bit about where that fits in this timeline and how you went about putting together this manuscript?
I'd love to. So the oldest poem there was in my chapbook. So, but I would say the oldest poem in that book is about 8 years old. I put that book together in Dorland at the writer's place 2 years before it got picked. And what I did was I printed out all the poems that I liked, that I had some faith in, and then just started thinking how to put this together. What are the themes? How do I braid it? Do I want to braid it? Do I want to have sections? I'd never done this. What do I do? Do I put jam on it? And I put it together the first time. And then there's sort of a gap in my memory, but what I do know is that I went to Frost Place and I studied with Tyree Day. And that was before I put the manuscript together, right before. Or actually, I'm not exactly sure, but he said he would look at it. And the first poem is always sort of terrorizing. What's going to be the first poem? And so that first poem was one that I'd written actually in his workshop. It's always been the first poem. Always. So I sent him the manuscript and he said, you need to go through this and color code it with all the themes. Color coded. What are the important themes? And every line has to be color coded. Everything. And there's, of course, a color for not particularly a theme, but you have to go through the whole book, choose your themes. It's an iterative process. So you read through the themes that come out. These are the colors I'm going to give it. And then you go back and you color code it. That was so great because I was stuck. I had this manuscript and I knew it wasn't finished and I didn't know what it needed. So I went through and I color coded it. It was like recess for poets, and realized, this poem really super doesn't fit, or I'm going to have to write more poems to make it fit. And there's holes in this manuscript, definitely. Things that I can't write, and the things that I couldn't write were about my family for the most part. At the time, I was working with a really good friend of mine, wonderful poet, Alison Albino in New York, and she was going through old photographs and writing these poems to the photographs and sending them to me and saying, "What do you think?" And I was like, "Oh man, you've been trying to write this for a long time, and now it's there, and it's great." And at the time, my husband and I were going through boxes and boxes of my mother's detritus that I'd had for decades but couldn't face, to try and clean, get rid of some stuff. He was like the fire master. We built one in the solo stove outside. And some stuff we would burn, and And Allison said, "You should try this." And I said, So I used indeed some of those documents and pictures that I found while digging through my mom's shit. And that really helped me to write those last. So all the poems with illustrations, I think there are about 8 of them.
Mm-hmm.
Those were written last.
So you feel that this seems to me like this exemplifies a great form of docu-poetry. Is that what you would consider it?
No, I would consider it more visual poetry. Or
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because in a way it's docu-poetry, but I don't. It's not. I mean, I take it in another direction, right?
Okay. So can you describe, because you did do several chapbooks or maybe a handful of chapbooks before this. So did it feel like you were prepping for that manuscript to tackle these difficult things that you needed to address?
That's such a good question. Unfortunately, that's what I thought I was doing, but no, no. I was writing I was, flexing my poetry muscles and learning how to put a book together, but not really. Only one of the poems from my chapbook survived. And that's true, two.
Mm.
And those, so maybe, but less so than I'd hoped. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Still seems like a trial by fire that, at the end of it,
Oh,
it's very difficult to confront no matter the preparation, right?
oh man. And so when right before I went to McDowell with my friend Flower, we do collaborative work.
Mm.
We got to go to McDowell. That happened. Shit. I couldn't believe it. But anyway, right before I went to McDowell, I finished writing those ekphrastic poems. That's what they are. They're ekphrastics.
Mm.
And I had like maybe 3 or 4 hours of not packing and not doing this. I think, you know what? Let's just let's put these in the manuscript and see what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
I swear to God. Usually when I'm sure you write, right?
Uh-huh.
You go through it's painstaking. You go through your manuscript and you say, this poem is, I love it, but it's not working. I love it, or Susie loved it, so it's a good poem. And I just
Yeah,
thought,
it's spot on.
I don't have a lot of time. These poems have to go in. What just guide me light. And so I went through and I swear to God, it was like, I don't believe in you. You're out. You go here. You're out. It was like, it wasn't all that pain. It wasn't all that agonizing. Like in, out, in, out. Put the poem, put it together, sent it to a few presses, and Free Verse Press was the first place I sent it. And they took it.
Wow. That's incredible. I mean, to go at that speed and with that kind of determination, to go from not feeling like you could face poetry or confront it or be a part of it, be liberated by it, to that moment of publication where you get that light at the end of the tunnel that tells you that you're going to be a poet, published, and it's going out into the world. Did you have any kind of revelation? Is there any use to see those things as revelations or moments of epiphany or achievement?
In a way, I mean, there have been others, like getting into Breadloaf the second time, like having Poetry Northwest take a poem.
Mm-hmm.
There's, like having Flower Conroy want to work with me. There's been others along the way, but indeed nothing like having a full manuscript accepted. Because I remember when I got that email or call, I forget now what happened. It was an email. And the funny thing was, I was sitting with my friend, Darcy again. When the chapbook got taken, I was sitting with her. And I said, you need to read this email. And that sort of happened again. It was like, oh my God. And I thought, who the hell's Free Verse Editions? I don't remember submitting to them. And I was really careful where I sent things. It was weird. That was weird. And Brenda Hillman chose it. So there. Ha! That to me is like so awesome.
Oh, that's beautiful. I mean, I think walking away from something like that or experiencing something like that must have been such a delight for you. But I have just a couple more questions to be mindful of your time. And Donna, this is such an inspiring and beautiful conversation that you've shared with me, and I'm
thank you.
Really grateful to have met you and to have learned more about your journey. I'm curious. Yeah. I'm very curious of what are some things that you're looking to do this year for your craft? I know that some folks don't believe in resolutions or intentions for the year, but because it's still early on in the year, I'm asking folks, what are some things that you'd like to do for you and your craft this year?
Right. I just need it all to fucking calm down. I,
Oh
I,
man.
I need, I mean, there's this wonderful sort of debate going on in my mind. Jory Graham is in this fantastic podcast with David Naiman, talks about how she gets from one book to another. She said, like that, she did a persona poem book. She said, and then I wrote persona poem after persona poem after persona poem after that book was done. It was like I had to write my way out of that. And those will never see the light of day. I have to write my way into a new voice, a new song. And I thought, this is gospel.
Mm.
And then Carl Phillips says, bullshit. You just write. There are people out there who've said to my publisher, don't let him write another one of those books. They're all the same, but they're not. So I'm really curious which of those people I'm going to be.
Mm.
I thought, I felt really liberated hearing Carl say, you are who you are. Carl's been, in many ways, my guardian angel. I did Breadloaf with him the year that it was remote.
Mm.
And if you've seen my book, I capitalize you when I'm speaking to the holy.
Mm.
And I have a certain kind of syntax. And in this workshop, somebody said, you don't have to capitalize. It's like, this is not up for discussion. There are many things that are, but this is just not, and Carl says, fight for your syntax.
Mm.
And that, has been sort of my mantra. You have to hear people when they say this isn't working. But in some ways, you have to fight for your syntax. So I'm trying to figure out who I'm going to be next, or if I am already that person.
Yeah. At what point you are in that transition, or if it's a balance or a dance where you kind of go across that spectrum. But
right. And really trying not to write about death. And I'm really failing. I'm really failing.
Well, I think it's a very noble pursuit to make sure that you remind us if you are indeed writing about it, because sometimes we as humans love to forget that that's such a pivotal part of our lives. One last thing here, because gosh, this has just been a really incredible time.
Oh, you're kind.
How would you describe success for a writer? And from your own point of view, I mean, you've taken some divergences and journeys across different disciplines, but as a writer, what is success? How are you defining that these days?
I get the image of a snail. And the snail's got two antennae. And to be honest, the antenna that's got awards on it and, that points towards some kind of renown in this tiny poetry world, I like that antenna. But the other antenna is just finding your writing and just doing it and digging as deep as you can and being brave and being open and reading and having new things come to you. So I like both of those antennae. And then there's always the shell, which is surprisingly wonderful and gooey.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, Donna, I think that's a beautiful note to end on. And I want to thank you so much for your time, because in conversations like these, we get a glimpse of the human being that you are. And this has been truly inspiring for me to get to follow your journey. Thank you for taking me on that adventure, at least just a taste of it. And of course, I want to thank you for your work, this beautiful culmination of your poetry life, which is General Release from the Beginning of the World. It sounds phenomenal, and I just want to thank you for putting us on the right track and for being awesome.
Thank you so much for your time and for interviewing me. It was really fun. You're a great interviewer.
Well, I try, but you make it real easy because you have a lot of beautiful stories and a wonderful trajectory. So thank you again, Donna, for
Thank you.
everything. And I hope we get to chat down the road, okay?
I hope so too.
Okay. Thanks again. I'll be in touch real soon.
Great.
Have a good Sunday. Take care.
Thank you. You too.
Bye.